The evening, the cloud across England will continue to fade away. Some hazy, wispy stuff across Scotland still, but generally a pleasant end to the day. Underneath all the clear spells that develop overnight, though, that will allow those temperatures to drop off much more widely, and so many areas will be getting down into those single-figure marks. Perhaps a touch of frost across northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. But into Bank Holiday Monday itself, there'll be a good number of sunny intervals. Do remember that UV levels will be high throughout the day, even with any wispy cloud around. We do, though, have a bit of a breeze developing across the south coast of England come Monday, and that will continue as we head into the forthcoming week. This easterly breeze just bringing some cooler air off the North Sea, so generally western areas will be faring best for our temperatures, but there'll still be a fair amount of sunshine around thanks to that high pressure system. Bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, welcome along to Neil Oliver Live. I have a major cold at the moment, so if I sneeze live on air, it'll be a first for all of us. Here we are on GB News, online, on TV and on radio. Tonight we'll be joined by an advocate for the vegan movement who says the health benefits of such a diet are amazing. and we should all think about doing it. I'm interested to contemplate what the vegan diet means for the planet as well. So we'll be joined by a dairy farmer from Pembrokeshire to talk about the impact the vegan movement has been having on his farm. Plus, in between sneezes, we'll be hearing from campaign group Save the Shire, who are making a plea to rescue the landscape that inspired John Ronald Reuel, Tolkien's Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, from a huge new solar farm which would overshadow Bilbo Baggins' original Bag End. All of that and more coming up, but first an update on the latest news from Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Neil. ITV says it found no evidence of a relationship between Philip Schofield and another employee during an investigation in 2020. The broadcaster says the pair were questioned after hearing the rumours, but both men denied they were seeing each other. The TV presenter resigned yesterday after admitting he did have an affair with a young male colleague, which he described as unwise but not illegal. He told the Daily Mail he lied about the relationship to his wife, to his colleagues, to his friends and to his agents. Mail and Sunday journalist Charlotte Griffiths says people in the industry must have known.
There was a video of him having lunch in a cafe with this young man, although I think he was 18 at the time. So it was the worst kept secret. You have to take him at his word. You know, Holly must have asked him about this. People around him must have asked him about this, and he must have lied. That's what he said, and that's all we know right now.
Well, GB News presenter and former This Morning host Eamon Holmes has hit out at his ex-colleague, saying he's finally been caught out. On social media, he said 4 high members of ITV management knew what sort of man he was and never once took action to prevent him controlling or taking advantage of his position over young people. Showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips told us that Schofield's actions were more than inappropriate.
He's saying it's not illegal, but it's also about an abuse of power, because Philip Schofield was the face of This Morning in a massive position of power. And then you've got a runner who, in the scheme of things within the scene, you know, within how it works behind the scenes, is much lower down the rung in terms of the power. So it's about that power imbalance, I think.
Well, in other news, air passengers have been voicing their frustrations following a nationwide border control system failure. Thousands of people travelling for the bank holiday are facing long delays following a technical fault affecting e-gates. Well, the Home Office says it is working to resolve the problem with the electronic system, which is operated by Border Force. The UK's biggest airport, Heathrow, says it's trying to manage queues and is working with authorities to fix the issue as quickly as possible. Well, staying with travel news, and passengers at the port of Dover are also experiencing delays. That's due to earlier IT issues, also at border control. Apologising for the disruption, the Port Authority says the problem has now been fixed, but there are still queues, with cars and coaches waiting around 45 minutes. A man who was arrested after a car crashed into the Downing Street gates has been charged with making indecent images of children. The 43-year-old was initially detained on suspicion of dangerous driving. That was following Thursday's incident. But officers were later seen searching the boot of the car before it was towed away. He's been remanded in custody after appearing in court on the unrelated offence and will reappear next month. 2 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested for disrupting the Gallagher Premiership rugby final at Twickenham. 37-year-old Dr Patrick Hart from Bristol and 40-year-old Sam Johnson from Essex ran onto the pitch midway through the first half of the match before throwing orange paint powder onto the field. Play was suspended as the men were escorted from the stadium by stewards. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now though, back to Neil.
The time when governments could offer an explanation for what they're doing and expect to have it accepted is over. The practice of lying about why they're doing something, laying a false trail, is hopelessly and forever exposed. Governments, whoever's behind governments, the media pushing the narratives of those governments are going to have to accept that with the advent of the internet and social media and the rest, we, the interested and inquiring citizens, can find out for ourselves what's going on. We can't be fooled anymore. Whatever a government wants to do, more importantly, why they want to do it, they're going to have to pull on their big boy and big girl pants and tell the people the truth up front. Because if they don't, we find out that truth anyway in what they used to call a New York Minute. Which brings me to the latest laughable hypocrisy by the BBC. Amid the launch of Verify, a new state-sponsored Ministry of Truth, if ever there was one, the BBC's own newly stamped disinformation correspondent, Mariana Spring, revealed that as part of her own pursuit of truth, she had created fake social media profiles, complete with made-up names and photos. Quote, "I have some undercover accounts set up for BBC's Americast podcast," she wrote. "These help in understanding the polarisation online. This is fascinating, to say the least." Those accounts set up during the 2022 midterm elections are Larry, a faith and flag conservative, Brittany from the populist right, Gabriella, the stressed sideliner, Michael, the Democratic mainstay, and Emma from the progressive left, all made up fiction. It's self-evident that those accounts, fake and misleading, are disinformation or misinformation, and by their very existence could presumably exacerbate the polarisation they're claimed to monitor. Spring's highfalutin claim in defence of the fake accounts is that they enable the pursuit of truth. Who's kidding who here? Mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them, she wrote. Is a mistruth the same as a lie? And if so, why not just use that more straightforward and precise word, lie? Or is the use of mistruth a slippery way of condemning and setting aside an alternative, valid interpretation of events and reality that the BBC simply does not like and certainly doesn't want widely circulated? Spring highlights her concerns about what she calls the conspiracy theory movement. Quote, "And then there's also investigating other mistruths and the real-world harm they can cause," she wrote. She writes about how the UK's conspiracy theory movement has evolved and intensified since the pandemic. Let's remember that so much ridiculed as conspiracy theory is revealed in the fullness of time as truth. She's also determinedly looking for connections between conspiracy and far-right figures. Are we to conclude that only the so-called far-right is to be subject to BBC scrutiny, that no one on the left, whatever the left is now, has any views that might be regarded as extreme? Consider, for example, the published views of one Oscar Bentley, now among the BBC's political fact-checkers. Bentley was described by the Daily Mail back in April as hard left, who has described Conservative MPs as lower than invertebrates and has said, "Never trust a Tory." Bentley's job's to help fact-check the content of political debates, a role a reasonable person might have assumed demanded demonstrable political impartiality. But apparently not, according to that BBC fact-checker. We must never trust a Tory on account of them having snake-like anatomy. I would say his mindset appears less than objective. Let me be clear, as we do say now, that I've no faith whatever in the honesty of members of any political party over another, Labour, Tory, Liberal, SNP, nor indeed whether they have spines. Apart from a couple of honourable exceptions, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could spit them. But here is the BBC, funded by a compulsory tax on the public, seeking to claim the moral high ground, a lofty perch literally overlooking its own newsroom, upon which to build a veritable fortress, a Camelot of objectivity, trustworthiness and truth. This is the same BBC that has in recent times carried headlines like the one on the 7th of July 2021, "Rural Racism in Dorset, Why is our countryside 98% white?" and also made repeated uses of the triple whammy of pale, stale and male. Objective, the BBC. I could go on and on about glaring inappropriateness of the BBC seeking to set itself up as a paragon of a virtue, but the fact is their hypocrisy also exposes an inconvenient truth, which is that the state is, it seems to be, now so frustrated with regular people talking among themselves, doing their own research into topics that interest them and sharing information online, it has opted for declaring itself the source of truth while dismissing other voices as mistruths, conspiracy theory. Remember when Jacinda Ardern, former PM of New Zealand, urged her citizens to make her government the sole source of truth in the land? If that didn't make your blood run cold in your veins, I don't know what would. Here in Britain, the state broadcaster now seeks more and more obviously to style its propagandists and activists as the Ministry of Truth. Too late though. Too many people here and around the world are now so sensitive to and therefore deliberately distanced from the state propaganda and so usefully immersed instead in legitimate sources of information. That's not misinformation or disinformation, it's just information. That the antics of those who would treat us like naughty children and read to us while we sit on the naughty step are too glaringly obvious ever to be trusted again. The truth, the actual truth of the world is self-evident. Each of us knows the difference between right and wrong without having to be told. We know when something feels wrong, sounds wrong, smells wrong, is wrong. Some might choose to do the wrong thing anyway, or to stand silent while wrong goes about its murky business, but each knows the difference just the same. The battle between truth and lies, between right and wrong, is increasingly about straightforward fundamentals. The ownership and control of the land we live on, the source and nature of the food we eat and that we must feed to our children, our freedom to ask questions of authority, freedom to go where we please in a free country without first proving our identity, freedom to buy and sell in privacy without the state and banks monitoring what we're doing, freedom from a future in which decisions about what we can or cannot do with our money might be made not by us but by others we do not know. If the prospect, the threat of some or all of this and more besides feels wrong to you, that's because it is. What's being contemplated by some now, foisted upon us now, is wrong. The emergence of a BBC effort like Verify is a symptom of a state more and more determined to be the only source of information. This growing intention to make dissent first uncomfortable and then increasingly impossible should give everyone pause for thought. Where choice is replaced by no choice or by nudging or perhaps coercion, a population must be rightly suspicious of the motives on the part of those driving the change. I've already mentioned the land. What is the truth about state intentions regarding our land, specifically farmland? On this point, we absolutely need truth because it's literally about the ground beneath our feet that provides the very stuff of our lives. In the Netherlands, the government is loudly determined to drive farmers off the land they have farmed for generations in line with the EU's Natura 2000 regulations. A third of Dutch cattle must go in order to combat a nitrogen crisis, a crisis that exists not in reality, but in the projections and predictions prepared by those in power and driving the so-called green agenda. The same is simmering on the other side of the Atlantic. On the 10th of May, at an Agriculture and Climate Summit hosted by the US Department of Agriculture, Joe Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, said net zero targets would not be reached without addressing greenhouse gas emissions from American farms. According to Kerry, farming creates a third of the world's total carbon emissions. He said cutting those emissions had to be front and centre of the war on global warming. He has said government confiscation of farmers' land was not off the table. If it's really the truth that we're trying to save the planet, shouldn't the priority be food independence? Perhaps an approach involving growing natural, good food as close to home as possible, an approach to eating fresh, seasonal food rather than flying food in from thousands of miles away. Who in their right mind would put central government in control of food, as if history says government collectivisation of farming has ever gone well? Let's not forget that when Stalin and Mao took control of farmland, tens of millions died of starvation and disease. I'll happily go on record to say we're not being told the truth about why so much is being changed without our consent. Entities we're supposed to trust say change is driven by the need to save the world and to drive equity and diversity. I say the truth of it all is too uncomfortable for them to say out loud. I say the world is being changed in the name of control of the many by the few. Same old, control of the land, 15-minute ghettos, digital currencies and ID, net zero. None of it's about saving the world and all of it's about control. I had hoped that after all the shouting down of voices questioning the way government handled the COVID debacle, things might have got easier, that speaking up on the latest issues of concern might have been accepted as the right thing to do. But no, The truth is that speaking out and asking questions is now even more likely to draw ridicule, insult and cancellation. Rather than being listened to, people are even more casually dehumanised, reduced to labels of the most offensive sort: racist, anti-Semitic, far-right extremist, calumnies that disgrace the spouter of the bile rather than its intended target. I've been on the receiving end of all of the above and more besides, and I hold the purveyors of such misapplied filth in the lowest regard. But in the new normal, none of what used to be minded as the rules of polite discourse matters at all, and individuals are apparently to be reduced, traduced, rendered into something to be regarded as despicable and dismissible. But here's the thing, the truth has not moved and has not changed. The truth is where it always was and what it always was. If a government, its propagandists and apparatchiks have to come up with a new office and a new label to try and persuade us they're telling the truth, then I say that ship has sailed. As I always say, that's my opinion, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming throughout the show. You can email at gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well, at gbnews. And if there's time, we'll get to comments later on in the show. Now, joining me throughout is the fabulous and best-selling author, Laura Dodsworth. Laura, BBC Project Verify. What do you think about the state broadcaster having to tell us it tells the truth?
There are a few things that stood out from the announcement, which you've just encapsulated there in your monologue. And one is this real demonisation of the term conspiracy theory. So conspiracy theory didn't exist as a term before the 1950s. The sociologist Karl Popper coined it. And it's funny how, as a world, we survived perfectly well without labelling people conspiracy theorists. So I wouldn't recommend that people dive headlong down rabbit holes and lose themselves in mistruths. I'd hate that to happen. But I think really the conspiracy would be the idea that powerful people don't collude and conspire for their own benefit. It happens all the time. And, you know, there are many conspiracy theories which turned out to be true. That doesn't mean they all do, but some do. Take, for example, the really awful MK Ultra program, which was implemented by the US's CIA and involved US, British and Canadian scientists who performed awful mind control experiments on unwitting citizens. The other thing that really stood out about the whole Verify thing is who's fact-checking the fact-checkers. Because facts change, information evolves. And there's also something known as the half-life of facts. Things move on. Take, for example, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the idea that it might have escaped from a lab was really squashed and suppressed. And in fact, there were a number of outlets that called that a conspiracy theory. So now it's considered quite a likely explanation for the origins of COVID-19. Not proven, but likely. Another one was, I mean, this is quite a specific one, but the language about it stood out to me at the time, the idea that, well, we were told that there was no plausible mechanism for the COVID vaccine to get into breast milk. And then, in fact, studies showed it did in teeny, tiny, tiny quantities and not proven to be unsafe at all, but it did cross. So the terminology, no plausible mechanism, comes down very strong. It's to tell you what to believe. And then when people said it might do, that was a conspiracy theory. But it wasn't a conspiracy theory. The facts evolved.
What troubles me more than anything, though, use of labels like conspiracy theorist and all the rest of it, and one government after another, like New Zealand did it now, seeking to suggest that there's only one source of truth. That sounds incredibly clumsy and frustrated to me. That sounds like governments and their propagandists just saying, stop listening to people at all. Just get the public to believe that no one is telling the truth except us. That's an exhausted administration, surely. They just can't debate anymore.
Yeah, to me, it feels like the death throes of this almost industrial censorship process that's going on, it smacks a bit of desperation. So, you know, if you inhabit social media like I do, you'll have seen there were thousands of negative comments about it, which must, if you work in that unit in BBC Verify, feel quite exhausting and like an onslaught. And I think Mariana Spring said that she'd received misogynist comments and it was very negative. But what they're perhaps not appreciating is an enormous popular strength of feeling that it's misplaced. There should be trusted source of information. Why don't people trust the BBC or the government to be a sole source of information? Well, first of all, I'd say people should always do their own research.
There should never be a sole source of information about anything.
People should do their own research, but you don't gain trust back by telling people what to believe. You know, trust is an organic and time-consuming process, and it involves telling the truth over a period of time and showing yourself to have integrity. And I think if people don't trust our politicians and news, they're probably right to.
That's what I feel. I want the governments and other agencies to just tell us what they're really about. It's the false trails that are laid to distract us that really bother me. All of this is to save the world. All of this is for such and such a noble cause.
Yeah.
When it's plainly not simply about that. There are other vested interests at play. And just for goodness sake, have the decency to get up in our faces and tell us the truth.
I know. I've got time to give you one example of...
Very brief. I think, in fact, we'll pick it up. I'm going to have to get to a break, but hold that thought, Laura. Got to go to a break. We'll be joined soon by Liam Keogh, the founder of PAM PR, a food and drink public relations agency that advocates all things vegan. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Last month, one of Britain's largest dairy companies launched a campaign backed by their own research, arguing that the rise of veganism among young people is responsible for the dairy industry's increasing precarious condition. Titled "Don't Cancel the Cow," the campaign suggested that people's choices not to consume dairy are ill-informed and argues for the need to balance the conversation when it comes to food and the health of our planet. Now, my first guest tonight, and this is a topic very close to my heart, is Liam Keogh, who's here to talk up all things vegan. Liam, thanks for doing this. I'll say from the top, you're not actually a vegan, but you're in favour of that as a choice.
Yeah, so I guess I'd class myself as a flexitarian, and I advocate for the vegan industry. I think it's an incredible part of the economy, employs a lot of people, generates millions of pounds, and there is a section of the community and society and the media who wants to disparage it, but I think that's a shame, because actually we're a world leader when it comes to vegan food and we should celebrate that.
What about, though, the push towards highly processed vegan food? I mean, I am all in favour of the mighty vegetable and fruit, and I would see all of those products celebrated for what they are, seasonal, grown locally, you know, not flown in from thousands of miles away. Eat what grows in your patch and have it for what it is. What about all this heavily processed so-called plant-based food, plant-based sausages, plant-based burgers? Why does the industry go that way?
I think there's a huge diversity in the industry. I think, yeah, sure, there's a lot of heavily processed stuff, as you will find in all elements of the food and drink industry. Consumers tend to like that. But actually,
Do they? Is that what they want?
Well, I mean,
processed food?
Yeah, I mean, you only need to look at the sales of heavily processed stuff to know that it's popular. However, actually, the vegan industry, the plant-based movement, has been at the forefront of saying, you know, we need to have a cleaner ingredient profile. There are lots of brands doing really, really great work in that regard. But look, the plant-based industry is in its infancy. So it's not necessarily at the stage yet where it's at the final level of evolution. So yeah, sure, there's probably brands that need to improve their ingredient profile, need to get better, need to go back to the core of what the product is, which is vegetables. But, you know, the vegan industry is diverse. There's a huge range there.
Is it fair that it rides shotgun with the notion of saving the planet? You know, when, say, the mass production of seed oils and, you know, and the wholesale production of avocados and other products is demonstrably deleterious to the ecosystems and the environment, and, you know, and takes a toll on animal life and all the rest of it, and yet it succeeds in badging itself as saving the earth.
I think the vegan industry's done very well to claim that mantle. And look, the food and drink industry needs to focus on being as environmentally friendly as possible. We all live on this planet. We want it to be around for a very long time for future generations. I personally think it's a red herring. Frankly, it's not going to have a tremendous impact on the environment, whether you have dairy milk or plant-based milk. The reality is a lot of the environmental issues come from the very top 1%. There was a report out the other day that said if we just halved the number of private jets in this country, we'd meet our net zero emissions. So, look, I think if the vegan industry is driving forward the food and drink market in general to be more environmentally friendly, fantastic. But I think there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of other benefits to it.
Laura, what do you think? You've got a lot of, you know, quite involved interests and an inquiring mind around the food that we eat. What do you make of the rise of veganism and its impact?
I think it's always been around, and it always will be. I mean, think about how many religions encourage it as well, you know, Buddhism. But in a way, I think of it as being like that. It's such a strong ideological belief. It's almost like a religion. What I don't like is when there's kind of a push to impose on people, like having meat-free days in canteens at schools or in public buildings. I think there's a bit of a top-down effort to push it onto people under the guise, at least, of there being an environmental benefit. Which, like you say, is probably a bit of a red herring because it's so much more complicated than that. Having vast monocultures of almonds can't possibly be better than having some local milk from cows. I do worry about it being pushed onto young people as a healthy diet because it's almost impossible to get a nutritionally complete vegan diet for young people growing up. I mean, there's a new cohort of scientists, it's 1,000 of them, come together under the banner called the Dublin Declaration, who said that we shouldn't be pushing veganism too hard because livestock agriculture is so important for the environment, but also for nutrition. I mean, there are billions of people around the world who would be eating more meat and dairy, and be healthier for it if only they could afford it.
What do you think of that, Liam? The idea that because it also pushes this hyper healthy profile of veganism, when there's definitely, demonstrably, scientifically, especially for youngsters, very young, it's problematic in them acquiring the necessary nutrients.
Yeah, I mean, I would challenge that. I think it's untrue, actually, that there is a top-down push towards veganism. The reality is the government supports the dairy and meat industry to the tune of millions of pounds a year. Rightly or wrongly, I think that's a good idea. Public Health England pushes the dairy consumption in its diet, and also, you know, we have free milk at school, subsidised milk at school. So I don't really take that argument. Is it healthier? Yeah, sure. There's loads to recommend a vegan diet. There's loads to recommend a flexitarian diet. But actually, you know, you can argue it on both ways. I think the reality is when it comes to food and drink, you just need to be moderate. You need to be balanced, and you do need to know the facts yourself a little bit and read into it.
So if it's not better for the planet, and if it's not necessarily better from a health point of view, what is it good for in terms of something that's being pushed ideologically as somehow morally superior?
Well, I don't believe it's being pushed by any particular department. I mean, if you compare the size, for example, of the vegan industry and the dairy and meat industry, like dairy meat billions, vegan is millions. There's no push from government to really enforce it and wipe out dairy meat. That's just fantasy.
Isn't that because not many people want it? I mean, plant-based foods are coming out of supermarket shelves because they're not selling.
Well, I just think the reality is that the dairy and meat industry is massive. They employ loads of people and the government supports them, and the vegan industry is in its infancy. I think it's fantasy to pretend that the government is somehow undermining traditional farming or dairy or meat to advance vegan. Now, look, obviously, you can argue that it's good for the environment. You can argue that it's good for health. My take on it is that it's just fantastic to have lots of choice. And actually, you know, what's really, really good is that the vegan industry is bringing more competition into the industry. That means better quality, better pricing, better choice for consumers. And if the meat industry and the dairy industry are struggling because veganism is promoting themselves as healthier, as better in the environment, then actually that's a really good incentive for them to improve in those areas as well.
Laura, would you contemplate such a lifestyle change?
No, I can say hand on heart, I could never be vegan. Definitely not. I have tried being vegetarian a few times, more when I was younger because I felt sorry for animals. I have to say I'm now much more at peace with eating animals. I think it's the natural human diet and I'm okay with it. And I put my money where my mouth was recently. I chose to dispatch my own food. I thought, you know, am I so comfortable eating meat because I'm just picking it up wrapped in cellophane from a supermarket? If I had to kill, butcher and eat the meat, could I do it? You know, could I do field to fork? And so I tried it, and I went to a small holding, and a couple of farmers let me, they trained me to dispatch a quail, and I butchered it and ate it, and also a turkey. And I have to say it was quite hard, especially the quail. It felt very visceral and quite emotional.
What about the feeling of then consuming something whose life you had brought to a close? Was there a difference?
There was a difference. I felt worse about the quail, and I think it's because it was so very small, and the way I had to dispatch it was... This is going to sound really, I think, shocking for people, but the traditional method of killing little birds is cervical dislocation, and with a small animal like a quail, on a small holding of that size, you would simply pull the head off. It's too small and wriggly for somebody who's inept to kind of hold it and use an axe. You would risk hurting it more and lose your fingers. And then it was very small. It's really the size of a starter. And so I felt quite a lot of guilt, actually, about taking life for the size of a starter. But I did it. The turkey, no, I didn't really have too much difficulty with it. I mean, I felt extremely responsible for making sure both birds weren't stressed. And I felt very worried that the turkey was still alive after I dispatched it because the body twitches, but it wasn't. But to be honest, it just looks like food. And I butchered it with the help of the farmer. It's a big animal to deal with, and ate it. And didn't feel guilty about the turkey. That felt a lot more comfortable.
I think
the quail was harder.
I think it's very appropriate that you did what you did. I doff my metaphorical cap to you.
We just need to be aware that, you know, meat, when it comes from wrapping off a shelf, was an animal. I think it's okay to eat it. And I wouldn't say everyone should go out and kill animals, but it's just being aware of where it comes from.
Liam, thank you for really balanced offering concerning the
Thank you
vegan
very
lifestyle.
much.
Thank you very much for that. It was a really open-minded and honest depiction of that. So, going to a break now, after which I'll be joined, hopefully, by a dairy farmer from Pembrokeshire who says the vegan movement has caused untold damage to his farm and business. Stay tuned.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Horse as
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Before the break, we heard from Liam Keogh about the benefits of veganism. But what impact does the push for all things plant-based have on established farms and communities? Well, let's ask Pembrokeshire farmer Steve Evans. Steve, are you there?
I am here.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining me. What kind of farm do you run?
We run a mixed business, predominantly dairy cows. We also grow some cereals, some wheat, some barley, some maize crops as well. We are in a rotation with a large-scale vegetable grower who grows cauliflowers, cabbage, leeks, carrots, potatoes, and we work through and through. It's so we're a multi-spur business then, should we say?
Now, my previous guest who was advocating veganism, was suggesting that it was very small, and compared to dairy and meat and livestock production, it was a very slight presence. But you're obviously finding it has a significant impact on what you're about.
It's interesting, and I appreciate his open-mindedness earlier on, because it's like from my side, I'm totally open-minded because at the end of the day, we're a mixed business, so we have opportunities to clip the ticket, if you like, via multiple sources. The vegan market hasn't really hit the dairy industry per se. What is hitting farmers' confidence in particular is the amount of misinformation out there. We are deemed as Satan for the environment. We've been farming for a millennia. I'm fourth generation on our farm. There is so much misinformation out there about food choice, about dietary advice. And farmers are generally pretty sick and tired of it. That is our greatest challenge, is actually countering the misinformation, dealing with the huge cost of production rises we faced over the last year. So the biggest threat to our business isn't from veganism per se, because at the end of the day, it only represents sort of 4 or 5% of the market share. We've had Kantar statistics over the last number of years have shown the veganism in particular has been pretty consistent in percentage terms of the population. Yes, there are more vegans. Yes, because the population's growing. Yes, there are more meat eaters because the population's growing. So is veganism a massive threat to the industry? No.
When you talk about misinformation, that's your major problem. What would be your biggest bugbear? What are you sick and tired of hearing levelled at your industry that you would say is demonstrably false?
The biggest one that it brings a smile to my face quite often is there was a report, an Oxford report used or compiled a few years ago, and it seems to be the go-to report in support of veganism across the world. Now, there was no accountancy in that report for water usage. I'm in Pembrokeshire. We get 2 meters of rain a year, yet they classify dairy as a water hog. Well, we can grow grass for fun here. We don't need to irrigate. We're on borehole water for drinking water. We have to use mains water, granted, for washing, milking equipment, things like that. But we are not water hogs. Is an interesting one as well, is around nitrogen use. And cows can harvest their own grass, they can spread their own manure, and grass will grow again. That's all we need is what's coming out of the air, in terms of moisture. So there is no, because of the way that study was compiled, there was no regional sort of acceptance. It was all put into one basket, right? Agriculture,
Steve,
livestock farming.
Bear with me while I bring in my studio guest, Laura Dodsworth. Sure. Laura, what do you think is driving it? I mean, even Liam said, that it wasn't about the environment particularly per se. Why would you say that the traditional industry is being demonised? Steve used the word Satan. If it's not truly about the environment, what is it about?
I don't believe what Liam was saying. I think he said it in good faith. But we do know that there are targets to reduce meat and dairy consumption.
But why?
That are set out by, the UN or...
But why? If it's not... but Steve's contending there that it's not having that, that dreadful impact on the environment. And if he is right, what else would be the motivation for taking away the dairy and the meat industry?
Because people have got their head in the clouds about it. Talking about scientists in labs and behavioural scientists and technocrats thinking that they can make these big sweeping decisions for for the globe. But of course, different parts of the world are different. Pembrokeshire is basically God's own country, and just let the cows and the livestock and the farmers do what they're good at.
Steve, what will happen to the environment of Pembrokeshire if there was to be the demise of the kind of traditional land management that you're an integral part of?
There was a former DEFRA minister posted on Twitter. He was abroad. I think he was in Romania. He posted a short video of how beautiful the scenery was. I called out his BS and I said, you could be in Pembrokeshire. And I shared a video on my Twitter account of Pembrokeshire. Beautiful woodland, beautiful grass, cattle out grazing, absolutely beautiful, beautiful place to be. What would happen in Pembrokeshire in particular? I mean, Neil, you've been to Pembrokeshire. You filmed down here in the past. You know, you're fully aware how beautiful it is down here. But it would rapidly, it wouldn't go back to the temperate rainforest that they claim Pembrokeshire has. It would become bracken, brambles. Yes, biodiverse, of course, but it would be an eyesore. Quite, you know, within 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
But the problem isn't that. It isn't the eyesore isn't the issue. It's where the hell does our food come from?
Absolutely. Steve Evans, I can't agree more. The very thought, that you raise the spectre of Pembrokeshire becoming an eyesore, I find an unbearable concept. And yes, where is the food supposed to come from without people like yourself?
If I could just jump in, Laura made the point there, you know, and we're talking about what is driving this. Yara, a fertilizer company, are opening up a new fertilizer plant shortly in the UK. Great, wonderful. You know, let's secure fertilizer supply. What makes fertilizer? Fossil fuel. Who is the CEO of Yara? Petter, what's his name? I do apologise. Stordeland, who is one of the key players in the Eat Lancet organisation. And what have they been advocating? They've been advocating veganism, plant-based diets. So he is quite happy to sit there as CEO of Yara to produce fertiliser of fossil fuels to sell to us, the farmer. You know, we use non-organic fertilisers here. We use artificial fertilisers. He is quite happy to sell it to us. Well, that's a financial decision. That isn't anything to do with the environment. That is purely financial. So he needs to make up his mind, along with his good lady wife, what on earth they actually want.
It's a conversation that needs to keep going. Steve Evans, Pembrokeshire, thank you very much for your time this evening. Coming up, I'll be joined by the campaigner trying to prevent a solar power station being built on the area of the country that inspired the Shire in Tolkien's Hobbit. See you in a mo.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
There you are. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. It was a landscape that Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien described as more like home to me than any other part of the world. The ancient trees and rolling farmland near the village of Dormston in Worcestershire were the inspiration for the home of the hobbits in his fantasy land Middle-earth. But part of it could be lost if plans for a huge 287-acre solar farm get the go-ahead. Backers say the project would generate enough energy to power more than 18,000 homes, but that hasn't stopped more than 2,000 campaigners sending letters calling for a halt to the plans. Among them, Save the Shire campaigner Laura Gretton, who joins me now. Hello, Laura. Can you hear me,
Hi.
Laura? How imminent and menacing is this threat to the landscape?
This is massive, but I think the first thing to note is that although the management company who are in charge of the planning application like to describe it as a solar panel farm so that people have this envisaged sort of local lambs frolicking around and milking cows, grazing the luscious grass, but that is not the case. This is a large-scale industrial power station in the middle of our beautiful countryside, and this is the last remaining landscape of J.R.R. Tolkien's, and once it's gone, that's it, and we're never going to get it back.
We're looking there at computer-generated, obviously CGI of what the arrival of the panels would look like, and it does look intimidating. How much support are you garnering for what you're trying to achieve? Anyone apart from regular people? Are there any big voices or people with the ability to affect change involved?
Yeah, this is massive for the local area. It's J.R.R. Tolkien is someone who the locals are incredibly proud of. So recently we had an extraordinary parish council meeting where hundreds of people turned up. On average, normally these meetings only sort of encourage perhaps maybe 5 or maybe 10 locals, but there were literally hundreds queuing to get into the village hall to all have their say as to how opposed they were for this industrial power station. And the great thing is as well is that all the Tolkienites across the country, they've all appreciated how important this is, that this doesn't go ahead. And they've all been voicing their concerns as well to the local county councillors, the local MP and all the district councillors who will be ultimately involved in whether this goes ahead or not.
What I find moving about the whole idea is that Tolkien was no fan of technology. You know, he didn't like trains, he didn't like cars, he didn't like electricity pylons and the rest. And you know, and he depicted characters like, you know, like Sauron, who industrialised the landscape, you know, as part of furthering his ambitions for total power. And it's being made manifest now, you know, right at ground zero in the Shire, in Hobbiton, so to speak, which I find affecting to listen to.
Absolutely, and it's just so clear from his writing and the picture early on in The Hobbit as well that this is most definitely the view he was talking about. As you said earlier on, this is the place in the countryside he associated as home. And Bag End, now Dormston Manor, this is the view from there, from the house where he spent so many glorious years and enjoyed the writing and all the inspiration that goes with it. Across the 287-acre solar industrial power station, there are currently beautiful footpaths where locals can go and wander and have
Laura,
this amazing view that he obviously so enjoys
I'm just going to
himself.
have to jump in, Laura, but simply because I'm running out of time. I wish you all of the best with this campaign. Tolkien and all of that, Laura, is very close to my heart, and I hope the campaign goes well for you. I make no bones about that. Thanks for all of that. Thanks, as always, to my guests, to my panellist, Laura Dodsworth. Thank you, Laura. Simon Evans sits in for me next week. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Next up, it's the Common Sense Crusade.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your evening weather update from the Met Office. As we look forward to the second day of the long weekend, it is looking to stay fine for many of us, all thanks to high pressure that is very much clinging onto much of the UK, keeping things nice and settled. Even this cold front that's been pushing into the northwest is continuing to fade away, and any of the rain that we have seen on it through Saturday is fizzling out, so it'll be more of a cloudy feature as it moves across Northern Ireland into central eastern areas of England. A few mist and fog patches perhaps forming across East Anglia, southeastern areas of England, but elsewhere there'll be a good number of clear intervals. Perhaps a mild night underneath the cloud itself, but where you do have those clear intervals, temperatures dropping down in some rural areas, particularly for higher ground areas of Scotland. So where we have those bright intervals first thing, it should be a lovely start to Sunday. This cloud just coming and going again across central areas might provide some lower stuff across some coastal areas, but generally it will break up into the afternoon. The odd shower possible, but you'll be unlucky to see one of those. Elsewhere, some nice sunny intervals climbing to highs of 22 Celsius in the south. As we head into the evening, the cloud across England will continue to fade away. Some hazy, wispy stuff across Scotland still, but generally a pleasant end to the day. Underneath all the clear spells that develop overnight, though, that will allow those temperatures to drop off much more widely, and so many areas will be getting down into those single-figure marks. Perhaps a touch of frost across northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. But into Bank Holiday Monday itself, there'll be a good number of sunny intervals. Do remember that UV levels will be high throughout the day, even with any wispy cloud around. We do, though, have a bit of a breeze developing across the south coast of England come Monday, and that will continue as we head into the forthcoming week. This easterly breeze just bringing some cooler air off the North Sea, so generally western areas will be faring best for our temperatures, but there'll still be a fair amount of sunshine around thanks to that high pressure.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here